The Orioles could have the best catching duo in baseball in 2026 with Adley Rutschman and Samuel Basallo. But will they add a third catcher to the mix as well? We'll talk about that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, November 4th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to talk about the seasons of Alex Jackson and Gary Sanchez behind the plate for the Orioles. How Gary had some spurts, but was pretty injured after bringing in as the Orioles backup for Adley Rutschman, and how Alex Jackson kind of came in and saved this Orioles catching situation, and what that means for his possibility to return to the O's in 2026. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So our Orioles player season review series for 2025 rolls on here with a Tuesday episode. We're going to talk about a couple of different catchers here in this one. We are going in descending order in terms of FanGraphs WAR that these players accrued in 2025. We have done already Gunnar, Trevor Rogers, Dean Kramer, Westberg, Povich, Rutschman, Holiday, and Kyle Bradish so far. Alex Jackson at 1.1 F-WAR actually comes in next, which is wild. We'll talk about some other catchers as well. Jeremiah Jackson and Dylan Beavers are the next two coming up potentially later this week here on the show. But let's talk about catching, and let's start with a guy who I didn't really expect to be talking about on some catching review episodes this offseason. But let's start with the Alex Jackson season review. Alex Jackson for the Orioles this season comes over to the O's, plays in 37 games and has 100 plate appearances, hits .220 with a .290 on base and a .473 slugging, good for a 111 WRC plus, meaning he was 11% better than a league average hitter in the big leagues this season. He did strike out a whopping 37% of the time while walking only 5%, but he clobbered 5 home runs for the Orioles and again was worth 1.1 FanGraphs WAR. Pretty impressive to do in just 37 games. So let's begin with what went right for the 29-year-old, about to be 30-year-old catcher, Alex Jackson. What went right is the Orioles gave him a chance to show what he can do. He was a first-round pick, Mariners' 4th overall selection in the 2014 MLB draft, but then who bounced around in both the minors and the majors. Debuted with the Braves in 2019, played with them for a little bit, played for the Marlins, the Brewers, and the Rays from 2019 through 2024. But with all the talent, teams were giving him chances, just could never even stick, really even struggled to stick as a main backup catcher, let alone as a number 1 catcher in the major leagues, despite all that prospect pedigree. Now, he continued to hit the ball hard, continued to play pretty good defense throughout that time, but the strikeout, the swing and miss was so bad, the offensive production was terrible, and it just made him at best like a third catcher for teams, a guy who would go up and down and fill in. Before this season, he had played 52 games in 2021 and 58 games in 2024. That was the closest he had come to like being at least a true backup catcher for anyone. He was at least kind of the backup catcher for the Rays last season, but never really was productive at all. I mean, for the Rays last year, 155 plate appearances, he had a 29 WRC plus. He hit 122 in that time. He was just awful as a hitter, but he still had the defense enough to keep him catching on with teams. The Yankees signed him to a minor league deal and had him in camp, and he actually had a good chance to make the Yankees as their backup catcher coming out of spring, but he just lost out the job to former Orioles minor leaguer JC Escarra. So Jackson was sent to AAA to be the main catcher there. And the Orioles went and got him out of desperation. The Orioles made the trade on July 6th to send cash and a player to be named later to the Yankees for Alex Jackson. At that point, Jackson was basically a league average hitter. He was hitting some home runs, walking a bit, playing a lot in AAA for the Yankees, and it's kind of what you're used to with Alex Jackson playing some good defense as well. But the Orioles just desperately needed a catcher. At that point, Both Adley Rutschman and Gary Sanchez, who began the year as the Orioles' two catchers, were both on the injured list when the O's made this trade on July 6th. Then Chadwick Tromp, who they brought in, who had been a catcher previously with the Giants and some other teams bouncing around, and the Braves, they bring him in. He comes up to catch. Now Tromp is on the injured list as well. And the Orioles just desperately needed a catcher. Like they had Maverick Handley in the mix at that point, but needed another catcher. So they went and got Alex Jackson. And Alex Jackson makes his first start with the Orioles on July 10th, and he has 2 doubles in that very first game, which began a streak. His first 10 hits as an Oriole went for extra bases, which set a new Major League Baseball record for most consecutive extra base hits with a new team before getting a single. He then had 2 singles on August 22nd, which ended his streak at 10 consecutive extra base hits for the new big league record. And the nice part for him was he did enough to stick around. Adley Rutschman came back on July 28th. The Orioles had also added veteran catcher Jacob Stallings to the mix at that point because Maverick Handley also was injured. So it was Stallings and Jackson who were on the Orioles roster. And when Adley came back, it was Jacob Stallings who was DFA'd, and Jackson stuck around as the Orioles' backup catcher. And it was the easy move. Stallings wasn't hitting at all, and Jackson was. Jackson remained the main backup for 3 weeks until Samuel Basallo was finally called up in mid-August. But he even still got a few starts in there after that when the Orioles were rolling with Jackson and Basallo. And, then he kind of did and also didn't have Rutschman in there for a little bit of the time as well. But before the Jackson versus Stallings decision, I mean, Alex Jackson had a 181 WRC plus in his first 26 plate appearances with the Orioles. He was kind of a backup for a while there behind Jacob Stallings. And then that kind of became clear that, oh yeah, he's way, way better. We should be playing this guy. And they kept him aboard. Now, Jackson did cool off a little bit as time went on, but the batted ball data looked pretty good. He, again, and this isn't a small sample size, this was just 100 big league plate appearances, but he posted a 14.8% barrel rate, would have put him in the top 25 in the majors if qualified. He posted a 40.7% launch angle sweet spot rate, which is the amount of batted balls that are kind of in the sweet spot for a launch angle. It's like between 8 and 32 degrees that leads to the most hits. That would be top 15 in Major League Baseball if qualified. And his average bat speed of 76.1 miles an hour, that's also top 15 in baseball. That's the bat speed of like James Wood and Ronald Acuna. Those are ridiculous hitters that he's in the same category with. And so you could see, and again, you can see why he was drafted 4th overall. Those are the kind of skills that he had at times throughout the minors and the raw tools that he had as a hitter. And the other nice part was his defense was actually awesome. Now, he started 27 games for the Orioles at catcher this year, which isn't a ton, but he was still a +4 fielding run value at StatCast, which meant he basically added 4 runs to the total for the Orioles with his defensive skills. He had elite pop time. He was +3 runs in framing. He was +3 runs in caught stealing. He was a pretty average blocker of the baseball as well. He was really, really good. Now for Jackson, it's not like everything was sunshine and rainbows, right? There was still some wrong in his game, and it was the wrong in his game that has led him to not becoming even a starting catcher for anyone at any point, despite being the 4th overall pick in the draft 11 years ago. And that's that there's still a whole lot of swing and miss in Alex Jackson's bat, like a whole lot of it. His 38.9% swing and miss rate was the 19th highest of all big league hitters this year among guys who had at least 100 plate appearances. His 37% strikeout rate was the 12th highest of major league hitters, minimum 100 plate appearances. And he did mash fastballs, which allowed him to get that extra base hit streak and have those 5 home runs. But he had a 47% swing and miss rate against breaking balls and a 53% swing and miss rate against off speeds, which is usually changeups and splitters. If you threw him any non-fastballs, it was the Alex Jackson hitter of old that had struggled for 5 years in and out of the big league level. So I'm not saying that Alex Jackson looked ready to be somebody's starting catcher, but what I am saying is he proved himself more than ever that even as just a backup, he belongs at the big league level. And he got that chance because the guy who was supposed to be the Orioles' backup at the big league level, Gary Sanchez, barely played this year because of injury. So let's talk about Gary Sanchez's season. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Game Time. The NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout, it's frustrating. Well, that's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Game Time is fast, it's easy, and it's backed by the Game Time guarantee. You'll always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. And I literally used Game Time to go to a game last night. Maryland men's basketball taking on Coppin State in Baltimore. Got tickets on Sunday on Game Time, 5 tickets for the best price I could find anywhere, and then went to the game on Monday night. And it's not just those games. You can get amazing deals on your favorite NFL games as well. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that is promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. So from Alex Jackson, who ended up being the better of the Orioles backup catchers this year, we move to Gary Sanchez, who the Orioles brought in as a free agent on a 1-year, $8.5 million deal in the offseason. Gary, who was 32 years old this season, was brought in to give a potentially high ceiling backup type to Adley Rutschman, but we didn't see a whole lot of him. Just 30 games for Sanchez. He had 101 plate appearances for the Orioles. He hit .231 with a .297 on base and a .418 slugging, 5 home runs, walked just 4% of the time, struck out 27% of the time. All that came together for Gary Sanchez to leave him as a perfectly league average hitter. It was a 100 WRC plus for Sanchez. Defense struggled a little bit, and he ended up being a negative 0.1 FanGraphs WAR on the season. So what went right for Gary Sanchez? Well, he went on an absolute heater in the month of June. Sanchez returned from an IL stint on June 14th, was inserted back into the lineup, and for the rest of the month, he was playing a lot too, was incredible. 53 plate appearances for the rest of June. Sanchez slashed .354, .415, .646 with 4 homers, a 63% hard hit rate. That's like above Aaron Judge levels, and a 196 WRC plus. Among hitters who had at least 50 big league plate appearances in the month of June, Gary Sanchez was the 5th best hitter in Major League Baseball that month. Only Juan Soto, Max Muncy, Ronald Acuna, and Yandy Diaz were better than Gary Sanchez in the big leagues in the month of June. And to be honest with you, that stretch in June was really the only time that Gary Sanchez was healthy, but he had some really, really good data from that time. He ended the season with a 57.8% hard hit rate. Again, that is Aaron Judge territory. His bat speed was still really good. He didn't chase out of the strike zone a ton. He was hitting the ball hard. He was squaring the ball up pretty well. That's all good stuff moving forward for Sanchez, who is going to turn 33 next month and is still looking to play and at least be somebody's backup catcher in the major leagues in 2026. And that underlying data when he was healthy, I think is going to help him to do that. Now, the issue is what went wrong is that he was just so injured, right? He had a chance. Now, he came in, he knew he was signed for $8 million to be the backup catcher for Adley Rutschman. He 100% knew what his role was when he signed that free agent deal with the Orioles last offseason. But he had a chance to be a lot more than that because he could have been a starting catcher this year for the amount of time that Adley Rutschman missed with those multiple oblique injuries. And Gary, at the very least, could have built his free agent value a lot more had he played more. But he went on the injured list on April 28th with right wrist inflammation, and he told the media, and it seemed pretty true, he'd been dealing with that wrist issue all season. It just got worse and worse over that first month and finally had to go on the IL. And when he was playing as the backup, he was 3 for 30 with 12 strikeouts in the month of April. Clearly, and again, Gary Sanchez has defensive problems, but we know he can hit. Clearly something was going on with that wrist. So he goes out, he misses 5 or 6 weeks. He comes back in mid-June from the wrist injury and goes on that heater for the remainder of June. And then he slams his knee into a sign behind home plate trying to catch a pop-up and goes back on the injured list in early July with a right knee sprain. He was placed on the IL on July 6th, and that was it for him. He was hitting, he was doing baseball activities in September trying to come back from the injury, But at that point, he was healthy enough to actually be activated, it seemed like, off the IL in late September. But it wasn't worth doing it, right? The Orioles had Basallo, they had Alex Jackson on the roster, and Adley Rutschman came back from the IL for the final week of the regular season. You're just not going to take someone's roster spot to give it to Gary Sanchez for a couple of weeks when he's a veteran catcher who's going to become a free agent. Quite frankly, the Orioles aren't going to bring him back for 2026. Now, he only started 19 games at catcher, so we didn't get a big sample size, but he did manage to have -5 fielding run value. That is not good. He had really improved as a defensive catcher last year with the Milwaukee Brewers as their backup. They've done a lot of work with him. Now, some of this can be, again, it's just 19 games. We barely saw any of them, but some of that work did go away this year, and he made up for some of it with the bat on that heater he went on in June, but it was just, you didn't see enough of him to really see what Gary Sanchez is at this point. And despite the underlying data, that's going to hurt his value. I mean, he might end up with a lower deal than $8.5 million, whoever gives him a one-year deal to be a backup this offseason. And again, I really don't think it's going to be the Orioles, but that's not just because, hey, the Orioles have Rutschman and Basallo, they have their two catchers. There seems to be a chance that the Orioles could carry a third catcher next year. Why would they do that, though? And who would be that lead candidate? We'll talk about that to finish off the show coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can actually get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement of this sports season, whether you're following the NFL or the NBA or both. There's no better time to jump in on the action. If you haven't tried it yet, Prize Picks is the simplest way to play. Just pick more or less on at least two player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere Prize Picks operates, including California, Texas, and Georgia. You can use Prize Picks for Sunday football, NBA tip-offs. It keeps the game exciting. It takes like a minute to put in your lineup, and plus, if one of your players leaves early with an injury, the injury reboot can save your lineup from a loss. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. And that's at Prize Picks. It's good to be right. So we will finish off this episode by trying to answer the question, will the Orioles potentially carry a third catcher in 2026? I think the first question is, why would they even do it, right? You have Adley Rutschman and Samuel Basallo on this roster next year. Now, I know Adley is coming off a year and a half of injury and disappointment, but we've seen the all-star Adley for 2.5 years, from 2022 until basically the all-star break in 24. We saw the all-star top 3 catcher in baseball, Adley Rutschman. He's not old. He's still in his prime. If he's healthy, that is still in there. Talked about this on the Adley season review episode a couple of weeks ago. In Samuel Basallo, I know he wasn't amazing down the stretch, but it was first 6 weeks in the big leagues. He showed some promise. He's going to get better as a catcher. He's a top 10 prospect in Major League Baseball right now. The Orioles, the first player they gave a long-term extension to was Basallo after he debuted in August. This could be the best catching duo, 1 and 2, in Major League Baseball next year with Rutschman and Basallo. So you might be thinking, Connor, if the Orioles are going to have maybe at worst, if they stay healthy, like a top 5 catching duo, why would you even think about wasting a roster spot on a third catcher? Well, I think there's really 2 reasons why you would do it. One would be how Adley and Basallo are going to be deployed. If you have a third catcher, you can give Adley Rutschman some days off. But in a perfect world, you have a lot of games in which Adley and Basallo are both in the lineup, whether Adley's catching and Basallo's DHing or playing first base, or maybe Basallo's in there catching and Adley's getting a DH day, or whatever it may be. You're going to try to get both of their bats in the lineup as much as you can if they're healthy. I mean, again, this is all considering health. 2 of the Orioles' 9 best hitters on the team next year are going to be catchers in Rutschman and Basallo. You want to get your 9 best hitters in the lineup as much as possible, and you want to give catchers some days off, so using them in the DH spot is how you're going to do that. If you have both your catchers in the lineup, one DHing, it is really nice to have a third catcher on the bench, because if your starting catcher gets hurt in a game, you have to end up burning the DH and your pitcher's got to hit for the rest of it. Also, it would just make it easier to give Adley Rutschman more rest, help him avoid injury if you have a third catcher to throw into the mix. Now, as I've said, I don't think that third catcher is going to be Gary Sanchez, right? He still showed that he has it with the bat, but he's 33. He was too injured. His defense took a step back. And now with Basallo being kind of the quote-unquote backup catcher, you're looking for much more of a glove-first guy in that third catcher role. They went for the bat first as the backup with Sanchez. It was more glove first when they had James McCann in that role in the 2 previous years. If they would carry a third catcher, I think with the offense you think you could get from Rutschman and Basallo, it would be more of a glove guy. So could someone like Maverick Handley make that roster, right? We did see some Maverick Handley in 2025. We saw his major league debut. We saw him be a fine defender. We also saw him go 3 for 41 with 18 strikeouts at the plate as a major league hitter, even though he's hitting pretty well in AAA the last 2 seasons. Handley is on the 40-man roster at the moment, but I bet the Orioles are going to try to sneak him off the 40-man this offseason. They'll just hope he'll be good catching depth to have in AAA. It's also crazy that the Orioles also used David Banuelos, Chadwick Tromp, and Jacob Stallings as catchers last year. Now, Banuelos, I bet they bring back on a minor league deal into the organization. They love having him as the taxi squad catcher to travel with the team. And they'll also bring in another veteran-type catcher on a minor league deal to be more AAA depth. I wouldn't even be surprised if it's someone like Chadwick Tromp, who they try and bring back on a minor league deal. They're going to need some more catchers, at least in spring training. But hopefully they'll never have to use this many catchers in a season again, because it was an unbelievable amount of catching injuries that the Orioles saw. Like, even when they brought in Trump and then he gets hurt, they bring up Handley and he gets hurt. It was just insane to watch all these injuries. But if they do carry a third catcher because of, getting Adley more rest and having Basallo DHing and making it better for the roster, I think it's Alex Jackson or nothing. I think either they choose to carry Alex Jackson or they just go with 2 catchers. Now, Jackson is out of minor league options, which makes it tough, right? If you don't put him on the roster, he's going to be subjected to waivers, and somebody's probably going to pick him up with what he showed with the Orioles last year. But again, he's been a journeyman catcher, and the Orioles never would have had him, even in the organization this year, had they not had 4 other catchers get hurt. So that kind of puts it into perspective on how hard you want to try to keep Alex Jackson in this organization. But you got to give him credit for how good he was in those 37 games that we saw him with the Orioles. I think there's a definite chance Jackson gets DFA'd at some point this offseason. It would be interesting to see if he would be claimed on waivers by someone, but the Orioles either way are going to want him back, at least in spring training, in some capacity. Jackson gives you some pop. He gives you the good defense you'd be looking for in a third catcher. And, you wouldn't hate yourself if you started him a few times, like maybe against some left-handed pitchers. If you did have Rutschman get hurt, if Basallo was struggling, you need to send Basallo back to the minors, or Rutschman's back on the IL. If you then have Alex Jackson to turn to be the main backup catcher, you feel pretty good about that still going forward if you lose one of those 2 guys for a stretch of time. And if you're fully healthy, you can DH, Adley and Basallo more, get them in the lineup more, knowing you have Alex Jackson behind them to spell Adley some, but also not have to have you use your pitcher and burn your DH if one of those guys does get hurt during a game, which it's a catcher, it's Adley, it's a 162 game season. It's probably something that could happen if you're playing Rutschman and Basallo together in the lineup a lot. I wouldn't make it the biggest priority in the world. Like, I wouldn't do other moves surrounding, and if you find a better utility player, you find another better hitter that takes the roster spot away from Alex Jackson, absolutely do that. They can totally manage having it just be Rutschman and Basallo on this roster. But if we get to opening day and Adley Rutschman, Samuel Basallo, and Alex Jackson all make the 26-man opening day roster, I'm really not going to be upset with that. Like, I will understand the reasoning the O's do it with 3 catchers that I just laid out. I will remember how good Alex Jackson was in the chance he got with the Orioles. I remember that he was a number 4 overall pick, and there's still talent in there, and he's only going to be 30 years old next year. I'd be down. Again, not going to prioritize it, but I'd be down for that. Now, if it seems like the Orioles are making less moves to be able to do that, that's not something you want to do. But if it falls into their lap where there's space to carry a third catcher and it is Alex Jackson, because, you can kind of count Basallo as a first baseman just as much as a catcher. And maybe that makes you want to have Jackson. So you can both give Adley a rest and not have to play Basallo back there a ton as he still fully develops kind of his defensive catching skills. And there's still questions about Basallo if he would ever be the number one catcher for the Orioles, because the defense kind of lags behind the rest of his game. That's another reason why it'd be really nice to have that third catcher in Jackson. I'd say it's right around 50-50 that's going to happen, but I'd be totally fine. And potentially, if the rest of the roster looks good, we'll see what this offseason looks like, potentially be in favor of the Orioles carrying Alex Jackson as a third catcher going into 2026. But let me know in the comments here what you think. Should they carry a third catcher? Should they not? Right here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, subscribe to the show. Follow us wherever you listen, Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and leave a 5-star rating and a review. It really, really helps out the pod. And if you have any Orioles thoughts, you want to ask a question, talk some ball, ask a mailbag question, you want to give some feedback on the show, always appreciate it. You can email me, lockedonorioles@gmail.com. We will be back tomorrow because there's a big press conference coming up today. Craig Albernaz is officially being introduced as the new Orioles manager at the press conference today. Mike Elias and David Rubenstein will also speak. We may learn more about the Orioles offseason plans. We may learn more about how the rest of Albernaz's coaching staff is going to shake out here. I'll get you to kind of the full recap of that presser coming up on tomorrow's episode. Plus, we'll talk a little bit about the options coming up on some Oriole contracts. Jorge Mateo, Dietrich Enns, and Tyler O'Neill are the ones with options decisions that have to be made by the end of the day here on Wednesday. So we'll parse through those briefly on tomorrow's episode as well. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.